Yeah, the other two speakers, please, Jason and Ross, come to me. Sit down. Now I'm sure because they've been very interesting presentations, and they really have been, there's no question about that. We'll take questions on the floor first. Has anybody got any questions on Ross's billion euro or Jason's work? It's fascinating. It's just fascinating. Questions, anybody? Alan?
Firstly, sorry I missed your talk, Ross.
No worries, you've seen it before. Really interesting. Jason and Ross, you both mentioned people, process and technology. But just to bring it back, I mean, procurement contracts, that's what sort of sets the behaviours, isn't it? So, how important in setting up your data structure for a project is the contract or the subcontract and the procurement, because that will dictate whether you can pay or not pay for these variations.
Yeah. No, I think Ross you had it in your presentation there about you need to get engaged with the commercial team early on, so you have the right content within those contracts, because that's actually, if it's not in the contract, they're not going to do it. It's like everyone has the contract is defining what their core requirements of what they need to do, and obviously they're not going to overstretch or do something that maybe they feel is going to be more administrative, that's going to cost them more from an administration, or they need an extra person on the job to manage it. But embedding it in the contracts early allows them, when they're pricing it, they can make the right allowances, put the right team in place for that. If you try and bring that into execution, which I've seen many times, that you go, okay, it's BIM, and then all these things need to happen to really to create a collaborative environment. People usually throw the contract back and says, where does it say in that contract? Show me that line. Or they may say, there's a line there, but it's not clear enough, it's too obscure. Oh, BIM level 2, one liner, and that's it. You really need that DEP. It's a big document for a reason, but it has that right level of detail in it, so people can see who's responsible for what. So that matrix you showed on the screen, where you can see this is a client responsibility as a GC, or as a supply chain responsibility, having that clear distinction, that's just about communication, so people know what to expect, and they can then price things accordingly.
Just two comments on that. I would say, for your own organisation, it doesn't matter what the contract says. You need to set your standard in terms of your approach to the project. Because what happens when you set standards and processes is you create efficiency for your own organisation. It doesn't matter what the contract says, because you get the value yourselves. That's one of the key points, I think. And then you can always rely on the contract on the project itself, but you need an organisational change effectively to be able to improve on this. And the reality is, as quantity surveyors, we don't have enough of us in the industry, so we need to do more with less, and the only way we can do that is efficiency in reality. But the contracts, they're an interesting piece, I would say, because it's clients at the end of the day that have this responsibility, and they're often the least informed. And so you're trying to educate them on the project under a certain contract to show that there's value if you were to change it. So again, it's kind of up to your organisation to see if you can push the envelope a little bit on the project under your contract agreement. If we all start managing the contracts, we will never create any value. We'll just be looking internally. And we need to be looking at creating efficiency in the industry in the country.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions? Claire?
I have a question for the public, if that's okay.
Yeah. Claire,
What is the biggest challenge that you have right now in your project in order to follow or to go close to the estimated budget that you did have at the beginning of the project? Because I'm thinking that sometimes you go over, right?
If you want to take that, Jason.
Andrew Gibson said, and hold the mic and then I'll pass it over to you. What we've seen a lot of times is that the estimates aren't in the same structure as the contracts, and they can't be related. We need to have standards where you're able to assess line by line from the original concept, estimate or budget, right through the entire project life cycle, right through procurement and controlling change for the contractor. If we standardise that, we can link everything in a granular format. I think that's really what you were talking about, was connecting information.
Yeah, and also having the right level of detail, so knowing with your design, if you've got a concept design or an early stage 3 design, what's not in there that you still need to allow for. So the certainty on the cost plan will mature with the design, and it's having an understanding of that. Typically, as it matures, your knowns are known, and so you can have fluctuations in your cost plan. It's typically going to go up. You've got a higher level of detail. You can price things with a much more accurate certainty, but it's just having that understanding of. Most people deal with a contingency pot that starts fairly large and ends fairly small by the time they deliver the project. But that's the point of contingency. As you start to get the design matures, so does the cost plan and the schedule along with it, so you know what you're dealing with.
Thank you. Claire?
Yes, I'd like to double click on, sorry, that's an IBM, elements around the people side. So you're talking about, Jason, embedding yourself, integrated collaboration into the teams, throughout the project life cycle. And you've already hit on, often the client is not as educated or as informed as they, I guess it's not their day job to do this, so that's excusable as well. So how do you embed yourselves in these groups? How easy has that been? How successful is it? And then going forward, how do you continue that? So from a people perspective.
I think it's challenging. It's always challenging because you've got lots of different stakeholders with different agendas, different areas of expertise, and different levels of knowledge. And I guess from a consultancy point of view, that's why we're in business, because we're there to work on behalf of a client who has awareness that they're not as familiar with that digital landscape, so they get expertise on their behalf to work. And so then we engage with, say, the design teams or whether it's the GCs, and we can have much more structured sort of discussions, and also transparency, so that everyone, and I think that's what I love about data. Data is, if it's created and shared, it creates that transparency, that if you've got good, accurate data, a good level of transparency, people have a clearer vision of what they're dealing with, and it builds that sense of trust. And it's like a cycle, so you've got better trust, you get better transparency, and so on. So I think the people piece is like having good transparency, good levels of communication, and the reality is that clients or owners, large sort of asset owners, they do need to leverage consultancies that have that area of expertise and can talk the talk to the relevant parties and stakeholders involved that they need to rely on from a supply chain point of view.
It's an interesting point because it's a challenge, isn't it? A little bit of experience in the international market where quantity surveying doesn't really exist because there's very few countries in the world that actually educate in this. We always say that everybody's a cost manager because at one point along their career, every architect, engineer, project manager would have sat down and done a cost estimate. Walk into a room on the international market and talk about square meter prices, everybody will have an opinion on it. So what we see a lot in the Nordics, for example, especially like in Denmark, where we have a lot of experience, is that we're brought in initially just to do estimates. You're an estimator, that's all you do. And it's always at the end, and it's always problems, which is why the integrated approach we talk about. So it's a long-term cyclical process of education that we're talking about, where we initially engage with the client on an estimate, and we're going, well, this is what you should do. And they're going, well, who should do that? And we're going, well, we can do it for you. And slowly building over time, but it takes a long time, especially for customers, clients, or owners who don't have the level of experience.
And I guess you've got to be there in the room as well.
Yeah.
So
to a certain degree, you do. I suppose we do a lot of our work. Like that project I presented there is in Vietnam, and we visited 3 times in 4 years. We did all of it online. So it really depends on that relationship you build with the client. But initially, that initial engagement, it has to be face-to-face, that human connection, that trust builds when you look someone in the eye. in the room, but once that trust is built in, you can absolutely deliver remotely.
Yeah, no, sorry, what I meant was, in order to make that change and to change an industry, really, people have to know about Cosmos.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? So how does the industry lift across the board when there's only half a dozen individuals really at this stage that are telling the story and showing the value? Because to get to the whole industry, it's going to take more than one person.
And also more than one day. So it's a long period of time. We're talking about generational change here in reality. Hopefully in our careers we'll see a shift to the majority rather than the minority, but it's generational change. The new standards that have been created and legislated are driving that change now because we're actually talking about it. The likes of ICMS and bidding on public projects. We've been talking about for years, but there's no legislation really driving us. So we need to be pushed. We've had the card for long enough now to stick, and really to make changes a wide industry, we need legislative change to come and basically feed us into it, basically. Without violence, of course.
I think where on the previous presentation where you had policies included people process policies then drive the change because they're mandating obviously at scale to lift the industry. You need the large public sector investment that they're spending on these big contracts to go, well, we expect this to use ISO 19650, to use ICMS. Then that starts to drive change in the industry and it becomes more of a standard practice that then the private sector will go, okay, we'll also mandate this because we're already doing it. Like you said, you're doing it, creating value. We see where the value is created to implement these standards, so we get better data, so we get better transparency. We can see what's happening in real time on our projects.
One final question. Yes, the gentleman there.
You talked about standardising that, when you're digitalising, standardising is obviously a very important element to it. And Jason mentioned that digital tools have quite low uptake at the moment in the industry. So there's obviously the opportunity there to get early standardisation in, so that going forward you have that solid platform. But it's also a risk that as new tools are developed and things, that these standardisations, multiples pop up everywhere and it's a bit rash. So what do you think it looks like in terms of, because it's obviously very collaborative in terms of actually building that standard? What do you think that looks like? How do you think you push a single unified standard?
Yeah, I don't really have an answer to that one because especially when you look at software and how that's developed, it's in a global market. They're not driven by standards that's got a European standard or an Irish standard, or it's especially from the data structure. So Sam works with us in Gagmiller, and he's deals with a lot of trying to connect into APIs. And if you work from that on the technical side, connecting into every single software you connect has a whole different framework of what it's called and how it's structured. So there's a huge challenge there within standardisation. And with the software and sort of the digital tools, they're moving at scale, and everyone is doing good, bad, and in between on that framework. Even if you look at, say, Autodesk, which is a global, one of the largest software developers, within their modules it's fractured because they're also moving at scale. And they've done a lot of work in recent years to consolidate that into ACC, but it's still, when you connect into the back end, it's challenging to try and align all those parts from all the different modules.
Yeah, I agree with that, but I think if you purchase software with a singular ecosystem like Apple, you get tied into it in reality. So it definitely needs to be open source. So it doesn't matter what software you buy, your standards should be able to apply for that. And from us as QSs, we have a couple of standards like ICMS, or Method of Measurement NRM5, for example, or NRM for the UK, becomes that part of that standard. And then what we hear a lot in the industry is about embedding ICMS codes in the models. You can't do that. It doesn't work that way in reality. You need to be able to work within your specialization with your software, and it needs to be able to communicate that across disciplines in their software using open APIs or ISC as communication language, etc. So we're not trying to fully automate the entire industry right now. What we're trying to do is we're slowly building our knowledge base. So picking a standard like ICMS, understanding it, understanding how it embeds in your workflow, the value it can create for you is the first step. Doesn't matter what tool you use for that, as long as the tool suits your business and your organisation and the value you want to create. That's our opinion on it. Anyway.
Thank you. We'll have to call it close at this stage now. It's an interesting conversation. It's one we need to have again, I think, and this is an area we need to go back in and look at again, because there's a lot happening. And again, it's all to do with culture, processes, and it's to do with standardisation. And standardisation is a huge part of it. And as we're going through the BIM mandate, the ICMS mandate, and with the digital as well, and with the construction sector group, and with Northern Construction, and all of these things happening, there's a huge amount of standardisation coming, and we're really at the cusp of it. So 5 years from now, this industry will look completely different, absolutely different, and we're moving very fast. So I think this is a conversation we need to have again, and it's a conversation of huge interest to everybody. Really is of huge interest to everyone because of the automation, and because, of course, for quantity surveyors, we're getting fewer and fewer and becoming more and more important because there's less and less of us, and AI is going to be brilliant for us. It's never going to do us out of a job. In fact, it will be to our advantage. However, we need to be aware of the downside to it, and there are huge downsides to it, and we do need to be conscious of those. So we'll have to call it a close, and I'd like to thank all our speakers. I'd like to thank Ross this morning, and Jason, and Andre, and thank you very, very much. They've been interesting, very, very interesting presentations.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.